As the ship approached the space station orbiting Saturn, Caroline Roach took a deep breath and steeled her resolve. Finally, after what felt like ages of waiting, she stepped off the ship onto the space station's landing platform. Her boots sounded hollow against the metal grating of the main corridor. The last time she had walked this path, she was only 8 years old. It was just a brief fueling pit stop on her family's way through the star system, but she still remembered the gleaming metal walls and the scent of old electronics. The station had come a long way since her last visit. So many people had worked towards its final completion. The halls were wider, with tall ceilings and more windows than most of Earth's modern-day cities. The construction team had designed the ship to make the crew feel less confined, rather than feel like what they actually were, confined inside a machine. Caroline's detective instincts were already on high alert, taking in every detail of the environment as she entered. She surveyed the station, noting its design, the number of crew members, and the lack of passengers. Most of the crew seemed to be scientists of some type, and she wondered what kind of projects had brought them to such a remote location. She navigated her way to the science laboratory and found the reason for her visit: a murder victim by the name Ethan Green. He was the lead engineer in charge of the advanced research and development workforce aboard the station. His body was encased in a plastic sheet with the face visible through the transparent material. He was a young man, mid-30s, with scruffy dark hair and a pale, almost waxy complexion. The cause of his death was exceedingly obvious. An ugly bullet hole was torn through the center of his chest cavity. Caroline felt an uneasiness settle over her as she examined the gruesome body, trying to take in all the details without letting emotion cloud her judgment. She pulled out her notebook and tried to jot down her observations. As she walked around the body writing things down, something caught her eye. A small pocket on the inside of the victim's shirt had been left unbuttoned. Moving closer, Caroline saw a crumpled paper wedged inside. She carefully retrieved it and flattened it out on the floor. To her surprise, it was a note with a handwritten date: December 12th, 2802, 9:45, the same day as the murder. Caroline quickly pocketed the note and stepped back from the body. The investigation had just taken an interesting turn, but until the body was returned to Earth for a closer autopsy, there was not much else that could be drawn from the crime scene. So she put her notes away and entered the main corridor of the station. It was filled with scientists, all of whom she noticed immediately stopped talking when she entered the room. She knew she was an intruder here, but felt no discomfort. She had a job to do, and she was confident she could do it well. She began to make her rounds, introducing herself to the scientists and asking them questions.
You all must know each other very well. Is there anything that you can tell me about the victim?
She said, looking around the room. The scientists gave her hesitant replies, shifting their eyes as they spoke and struggling to maintain eye contact. As they answered her inquiries, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She had just finished her rounds when the station commander, a tall, handsome man with blonde hair and a crisp uniform, entered the room. He seemed relieved to see Caroline, as if he had been waiting for her.
"Oh, you must be Detective Roach,"
he said, extending his hand.
"I'm glad you could make it. I'm Captain Reed, the station commander."
Yes, thank you, Captain.
Caroline said.
I'm happy to help. Is there anything you can tell me about the murder?
Reed shook his head and sighed.
"I'm afraid I don't know much. He was killed yesterday morning. His assistants found him shortly after coming to their work. The station security locked up the room shortly thereafter for your investigation. We'd be grateful for any insight that you can find."
Caroline nodded.
I'll do my best to get to the truth.
She assured him.
"Thank you, Detective. If you need any help, please don't hesitate to ask. My office is just around the corner."
Reed turned and left the room, leaving Caroline to work. Her first stop was the main computer on the station. She needed to get a full record of everybody on board. The station was a privately owned research facility, and she knew that they kept meticulous records of their employees. She typed away on the keyboard, the soft hum of the CPU and the cold glow of the monitor creating a stark contrast with the somber atmosphere in the computer lab. She clicked through one file after another, scrolling carefully through pages of information for any clues connected to the victim. One name caught her eye: Dr. Nathan Redmond. Caroline remembered hearing about him from her preliminary research. As somewhat of a celebrity on the station, Dr. Redmond was a medic who had been working on a new technology for a healing salve that instantly bonded with level 3 lacerations. It was about to be released and was going to take the medical world by storm. But more importantly, Caroline also knew from her notes that Redmond was the last to see the victim alive. She headed to Dr. Redmond's station, eager to question him. She peeked in through the window in the door and saw Dr. Redmond sitting at his desk, poring over some notes. He was easily recognizable from his data profile, an elderly gentleman in his 80s with a short gray goatee and a portly frame. She knocked on the door and he looked up from his work, obviously surprised to see a detective standing in front of him.
Yes, can I help you?
Hi, Dr. Redmond. I'm Detective Roach. I'm here to ask you some questions about the murder that happened on the station the other day.
Dr. Redmond looked down at the table and then back up at Caroline, a sad look on his face.
I did hear about that, yes.
He said slowly.
What would you like to know?
I understand you were the last to see the victim alive. Can you tell me what happened?
Dr. Redmond sighed and rubbed his forehead wearily.
It was the other day in the morning. I had just finished up some work, and I was about to go out for some coffee when I saw Ethan walking down the hall. We spoke briefly, then he went on his way.
How did it seem when you saw him? Was anything off? Did he say anything strange?
Dr. Redmond considered this question for a moment, before shaking his head slowly.
No, he seemed fine. But then something happened that surprised me. He stopped dead in his tracks and said, "I think I've cracked it," and rushed off. He was so excited, as if he had just made a major breakthrough in his time travel project.
Caroline was taken aback by Redmond's revelation.
Time travel project?
She asked, her curiosity piqued.
He was working on time travel.
Dr. Redmond gave a small smile.
Yes, that's right. Quite an ambitious one. He had been researching temporal mechanics, trying to find a way to manipulate the flow of time in order to travel from one point in the timeline to another. It would have been a revolutionary technology if it had actually worked. In actuality, it was a large waste of money. Ethan was just about to get moved to another project by the board of directors.
He sighed heavily and looked at Caroline intently.
Do you think it has anything to do with what happened to Ethan yesterday?
I'm not sure. Does anyone else have access to this time travel project?
Only a few people have access to that particular research project. Ethan and his two assistants, Dr. Tom Harris and Abigail Fairfield. It's not that we don't trust our staff, you understand, but time travel and the manipulation of the space-time continuum are sensitive matters. We thought it best to keep it restricted to a select few.
Thank you, Dr. Redmond. If you remember anything more, please let me know.
Dr. Redmond nodded.
Of course.
Caroline left Dr. Redmond's lab and headed back to the main computer. She needed to see if there was anything else about the time travel project in any of the station's records. She typed time travel into the computer and several files popped up. She tried to look at the files and noticed they were all empty. It was as if they had all been deleted.
That's strange.
Caroline thought. She knew that only a few people would have access to the main computer core. Technicians, station commanders, and select scientists were the types of people who would usually have access. She weighed her options and chose to follow up on her only clue, talking to Ethan's research assistants. She made her way to Tom Harris's room and knocked on the door. Surprisingly, it swung open. What Caroline saw when the door opened sent a chill up her spine. Tom Harris was lying on the floor, motionless, with a bullet hole through his chest. Another life had been taken by the mysterious serial killer who seemed intent on destroying everyone in Ethan Green's project. Caroline's heart raced as the realization hit her. Abigail Fairfield was probably the killer's next target. She had to warn her before it was too late. She sprinted out of the room, frantically searching for Abigail. Everywhere she went, she asked if anyone had seen her, but no one had seen Abigail since the news of Ethan's murder had broken. Caroline went to Abigail's apartment, fearing the worst. But when she knocked, Abigail answered with tears flowing down her cheeks and clutching a picture of herself and Ethan together. The picture had clearly been taken before the research project had begun and showed that both of them were happy and carefree in those days. Caroline delicately approached her.
Abigail, Tom Harris has been murdered and...
She paused to let the weight of her conversation sink in before landing the next blow.
I think you're the killer's next target.
Abigail's face paled.
Abigail, I think we need to put you in the next shuttle to Earth for your own safety.
I understand.
She said, her voice trembling ever so slightly.
I was already leaving.
Abigail motioned towards a packed suitcase by the bed.
I just need to get a few things from Ethan's lab and I'll be gone.
Caroline helped Abigail to her feet.
Let me help you.
Abigail laughed through her tears.
You mean you want to protect me?
Caroline shrugged and together they walked to Ethan's lab. Thankfully, Ethan's body had already been removed and loaded on a return shuttle home before they arrived. Slowly, Abigail began gathering some of Ethan's personal items, stuffing them into her suitcase with shaking hands. It was clear that this was a difficult task for her, and Caroline could not imagine the emotional pain she must be going through. When Abigail was done, she took one last look around the lab, and that's when Caroline noticed it. There, on one of the desks, was a strange-looking device, a large black box with intricate metal mechanism inside, and several buttons along the side.
What is this?
Asked Caroline curiously. Abigail smiled sadly as she looked at the device.
Oh, that's Ethan's time travel project. He wanted to find ways to travel through time so he could make up for lost opportunities in life. I guess he figured if he couldn't do it in real life, then maybe he could make it happen in his laboratory.
Did it ever work?
Abigail laughed softly and shook her head.
No, it never worked. We tried many times, but never got any results. It was just another one of his pipe dreams.
She said with a heavy sigh. Caroline felt a hole burning in her pocket where she had placed Ethan's note.
Could it be?
She wondered.
Did the date have something to do with Ethan's time travel project?
With shaking hands, she typed it in. Suddenly, the time travel box turned on, sending a shockwave of electricity and energy throughout the laboratory. The box began to shake, and Caroline could feel a strange sensation coming over her body. Abigail's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was happening. She yelled to get away from the box, but it was too late. Abigail faded from view. Caroline was transported. She was in the same room where she had been standing only moments before. Everything almost looked the same, only there was one slight difference. Ethan Green was standing in front of her, alive and well. Caroline was shocked. She tried to reach out and touch him, to confirm he was really there. But her hands just passed through his body. As Ethan looked around in confusion, Caroline slowly stepped forward.
Ethan? Ethan, can you hear me?
She asked desperately. But as the words escaped her lips, she realized that Ethan could not hear her. He ran his hands through his hair, looking confused, before turning back to the parts on his workbench, without ever noticing Caroline was there. Caroline sighed sadly. It seemed that even being able to travel back in time, she could not save Ethan from his unfortunate fate. She may have been able to bring him back for a few moments, but at the end of the day, he was still gone forever. Caroline stepped back and watched as Ethan continued to work on his time-traveling device, his hands a blur of motion as he tinkered and adjusted the intricate pieces. She couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride for him, watching him work on something that meant so much to him during his final days. Finally, Ethan seemed satisfied with the adjustments he had made and pressed the button on the side of the device. The box began to hum softly as the machinery clicked into place. Then suddenly there was a bright flash of light and a loud bang, which sent Caroline jumping back in shock. When she opened her eyes again, she saw it had worked. She had witnessed Ethan's time-traveling project operational for the first time. Before she could react, there was another bang and Ethan was back. Caroline noticed the terrified look in his eyes.
I saw it.
He said, his voice barely a whisper.
I know the day of my death.
He smacked himself on the forehead.
Why did I have to look myself up in the future? Of course that's the first thing I'll find.
Then after a rapid thought,
I'll have to write this down before I forget it.
Ethan grabbed a piece of paper from his desk, then scribbled something down quickly before putting it back in his pocket and collapsing in a nearby chair, exhausted from the strain of future knowledge.
Can I change it?
He asked, looking up at the ceiling in despair.
Of course I can change it. I have a time machine. I can change anything I want. I will not let Abigail end up destitute without any support or a family.
Caroline shook her head sadly. She knew there was nothing Ethan could do. She softly touched his shoulder in comfort, even though he couldn't see her. Just then, a door opened and Captain Reed came in. He took one look at Ethan's project on the table and Ethan resting in a chair and began to scold him.
I'm afraid you're out of extensions for your project, Mr. Green.
But it works.
Ethan protested.
No more hollow promises. Let's be clear. When you asked for funding all those years ago, we both knew how this was going to end. You needed a hot research topic to redeem your passage aboard the Icarus, never dreaming it would ever amount to anything. And I was hoping that the project would bring more investors than what you needed for your operational overhead.
He shook his head at Ethan in disappointment.
It seems that we have both failed our goals.
Reed sighed.
I'm calling it. Pack your things. We're moving you to Project Sunburst, Earthside.
You know, my project works and I can prove it.
Ethan protested even harder. The captain raised an eyebrow, skeptically.
How do you propose to do that?
He asked.
Well, I can tell you.
Ethan replied, his lips curled into a sly smirk as he fixed Captain Reed with a hard stare, who seemed taken aback by Ethan's sudden confidence. Caroline noticed the strange glint in Ethan's eyes, as if he knew something that nobody else in the room did. She wondered what secret knowledge she had gained with his time machine.
I can tell you exactly what happens 5 years from now because I have been there.
Reed scoffed in disbelief,
Enough already.
but Ethan threw up his hands and feigned disappointment.
Fine, if you don't think we can come to an agreement, that's up to you. But I think you'll want to hear what I have to say.
Why is that?
Reed asked incredulously.
During my visit to, again, the future, I heard a few interesting things while I was there. A lot of them pertain to you. Something about an extortion of illegal mining colonies for gaining extra funds.
Reed's face was red.
All lies.
He sputtered.
Yeah? Well, maybe we can cross-reference my information with the 3 board members that are currently accepting your bribes. They end up in the maximum. I can tell you all of this and more because I've been to the future and back. And in the end, it doesn't matter if you sack me because you're taking this whole damn corporation down within the year.
Ethan's words hung in the air between them as he held Captain Reed's gaze. No one said anything for what seemed to be an eternity. Ethan was so caught up by his outburst that he had not noticed Reed's hand slowly reach into his pocket and pull out a pistol. Suddenly, Ethan snapped back from his momentary reverie, and he saw the gun. There was nothing Caroline in her ghost form could do. The trigger was pulled. Ethan fell to the floor with a thud. His eyes were wide and unseeing, as he was still processing what had just happened. Before everything went black, Ethan fumbled with his pocket where he had put the note and muttered in a strange voice.
Wait, no. What's today's date?
Caroline watched with tears streaming down her face as the life slowly drained out of Ethan. For an instant, his eyes met hers, and she saw his expression change, as though he had felt her presence, but then he was gone. She turned her gaze to the captain. His arm was pulled back, and he was about to demolish the time machine with the butt of his gun when a side door swung open, stopping him in his tracks. Captain Reed shrunk into the shadows as Abigail walked into the room with several plates of food. They shattered on the ground the instant Abigail saw Ethan's body.
No, Ethan, are you okay? Ethan, get up.
Other scientists filled into the room, drawn by her screams of despair.
Ethan, get up. I said get up.
Caroline closed her eyes to blot out the scene. She didn't open them again until she heard the familiar bang. Her eyes opened and she saw present-day Abigail standing over her.
Hey, are you alright? Did it work? You disappeared for a moment there.
Caroline told her what she had seen, about the fate of her husband, how Captain Reed was the one who had pulled the gun from his coat and shot her husband.
We will bring him to justice, Abigail.
Caroline said adamantly.
No matter what it takes, I will take him down. You have my word.
Wiping tears from her eyes, Abigail looked at Caroline in the face.
No.
Caroline was taken back.
No?
No. It ends today.
Looking determined, Abigail pushed Caroline off and started walking away. Like watching a train wreck in slow motion, Abigail knew what was coming. Revenge was a dangerous but common emotion in her line of work. She reached out to Abigail to stop her, but then paused. She remembered what Ethan had said. Abigail was going to lead a life of poverty, all because of this man. Dozens of families aboard the station were probably about to lose their jobs after a scandal of this magnitude was released to the public. Instead, she nodded at Abigail's back as she headed in the direction of the captain's quarters.
Hey,
Abigail looked over her shoulder and Caroline sadly nodded.
be careful.
Her heart ached for what Abigail was about to do, but this time Caroline was deciding not to stand in the way. She shook away the sorrow and headed to the shuttle bay. She boarded the shuttle that was heading back to Earth with the body and thought of what she had seen in Ethan's eyes seconds before he had died. There was so much knowledge in them, like he knew exactly what was about to happen. Caroline lit her e-cigarette and wondered what it all meant as the shuttle departed the station.
I guess we'll have to wait and find out.